Hi Neil, great to meet up with you again and do some further work on your game. Just before we start going into the key points that we covered, just a quick look at the positives. There's a lot of them. Setup's looking great. Pelvis getting pushed forward now, pretty much standard procedure, so just a little bit more sort of towards the target than it would normally be. You've had a history in the past of having this sort of upper centre out in front of the lower centre due to the pelvis not being pushed forward. You're getting comfortable now with pushing the pelvis forward, creating a little bit of axis tilt, and you can see there clearly that that setup's good to go. So looking really good at P1. The manner in which you load the club has improved dramatically over the course of the last 18 months. During the first visit, it was a very late loading of the accumulators, particularly accumulator 1 and 2, which is the right arm and the wrists. See now it's a much more gradual process. We don't get the right arm leaving the side anywhere near as much. The wrists are becoming activated a lot earlier. By the time we get to P3, there's a little bit of hinge in the wrists, and we talked about that yesterday. And as the session went on and you were trying to tighten the radius in the downswing, the loading of the wrists here became a little bit more active in anticipation of what you were trying to do during the downswing. So we're aware of that. We talked about that. When you look at the type of technique you've got, as you stated yourself, you've got a tendency to not quite hinge the wrists enough, so the radius can tend to be perhaps a little bit wider. Arc can be a little bit deeper as a result of that. You also make an aggressive move downward into the ground during transition and have a history of not pushing up at the ground quite as hard as you maybe need to. That wasn't the case on this visit, but these are just tendencies that you've had. So we've got to make sure a few boxes are ticked every time we practice. So we can't have all three letting you down. Today, looking at this, you were loading. You could load better, and you did load better as the session went on. The weight moves forward nicely. You push up out of the ground nicely, much better than you were doing on your previous visit. On that one, this is early in the piece, maybe held the lead flex a little bit too long. You'd want to see that lead flex coming out gradually from P7 onwards, but it's coming out. And what was happening is the wrists were just coming out a little bit too fast. So the radius of the swing starts to get too wide too soon. If you add that to a lead knee that's maintaining its flex a little bit too long, or you add that to a radius that wasn't tight enough to start with, you're going to end up with a low point that's just a little bit, or a strike that's behind the ball. And what's actually happened is this arc that sort of should be like this, it's a little bit too wide, the radius gets a little bit too wide, and as a result the low point's still ahead of the ball, but the arc effectively becomes deeper, and consequently we hit the ground slightly behind the golf ball. So what we're looking for is to tighten the radius. If we take it to P7, one of the things that's typical of a player who's tightened the radius is that the handle is further forward. So that's shortening the distance from the swing arc to the base of the golf club, rather than having a shaft that's vertical, if you will, which obviously is the longest distance, widening the radius, causing the problems that you're encountering. So what we did here was, on the right hand side, we asked you to replace two balls on the mat, one about a grip's length behind the ball that we're going to hit. We're going to set up to the back ball, and we're going to try and hit the front ball. The goal here is to try and improve the positioning for you of the butt of the club at P6. Let's just get those videos maxed up at P6. And what we said that for you, we need the butt of the club to be in line with the mid right thigh as a bare minimum requirement. So here we're a little bit outside it, here we're a little bit more advanced, but we're going to accept the sort of centre of the right thigh as our bare minimum requirement for the release point. So with the release point a little bit further forward, handle a little bit further forward at P6, the feeling that you were getting was that sort of the right arm was expanding a little bit more, there was a little bit more pressure on the left thumb with the right hand, so accumulator 1's expanding a little bit more, there's a little bit more pressure on the thumb, so that's pressure point 1 pushing down. And as you came into impact, you can see that the handle's much further forward, radius of swing is a little bit tighter, and the lead wrist stays flatter for longer, so there's not quite as much cupping or extending of that lead wrist as you come through the hip. So that was the gist of what we worked on in regards to tightening the radius of your golf swing. We then took a little look at your driver swing, and we talked about how we'd like to see a setup that is a little bit more appropriate for the type of miss pattern that you experience. So we've got the 0 point, which is the centre of the left shoulder, and we tend to position the ball at times a little bit too far ahead of the 0 point. So therefore we're hitting up on the golf ball maybe 4 or 5 degrees, which means during the downswing we've got to get the club somehow, we've got to try and keep the club on the inside. So what we tend to do to sort of create that is we tend to sort of start extending. You can see the right heel kicking up faster than you would expect, and when this right heel kicks up too fast and the knees drive towards the golf ball, the tendency is to move the heel out towards the ball. So that's producing the heel strike where the ball leaks off to the right on you. Every now and again when you don't get the heel strike, you're going to pull the ball to the left because you're hitting up and across it. Some players do demonstrate this. If you can do that, that's fine. If you have difficulty doing this, then obviously we need to look at an alternative means. So on the swing on the right, what we're doing, or both swings, what we're actually doing is we're using the extension to keep the club coming from the inside at P6, and that right heel starts to kick up to keep it on the inside, but unfortunately it's pushing the heel out towards the golf ball. And what we talked about was how changing the position of the ball at P1, so if you were to move this ball from, let's say, 2 balls up ahead of 0 point like I've got it at the moment, to a ball back of 0 point, that would have a situation where you're able to hit down or level on the golf ball depending on how much we extend, and therefore keep the club coming from the inside without that excessive extension, and therefore that would start to diminish the heel strike. Based on the one shot that you hit doing that, I think you're on to a winner. It was one of the best finishing shots I've ever seen in a session, so good luck with that. If you think short term with driver, before we get together next and do a good session on driver, ball back, less spinning out, or ball back, less rotation through the hit, and just keep working those 2 basic principles in there. And then, like I said, on your next visit we'll have a real good session on your driver. Well done, have a great Christmas, and look forward to meeting up with you in 2017.